Guys, this is David. It was interesting. I was on a Twitter feed this morning and saw where one of the guys I follow was saying vlog, podcast. And it was kind of a motivational deal. There were a number of different responses. I sort of interpreted it from the concept of start talking and keep talking, which is kind of something that I'm trying to do right now. And watching some of the responses that he had gotten to his post, it was kind of interesting. I saw one from a Twitter user named Jake Goes Nomad. And he had basically said, I started a podcast. I'm finding it hard to get people to come on the podcast. What's my next step? I sort of got into a conversation with him a little bit about it because it was interesting. And I wanted to definitely share it in this in this format because it's a little bit deeper than even a Twitter 140 characters or whatever could show. And beyond the whole start talking and keep talking side to it, what he was talking about was he was digging. I kind of liken it to gold mining sometimes. It's digging. Hey, I created a podcast. Hey, I created a vlog. And I've got 2 viewers after a week. Man, this just stinks. Well, one thing about being a gold miner is everybody wants the gold, but ultimately to be successful as a gold miner, you got to learn to start loving to dig. And if you can actually do that, you've got somewhere, right? And that's one of the biggest things. People want the gold, they don't really want to do the digging. Since Jake was actually asking about what a next step might be, the biggest piece of advice that I had for him was really that he would focus on the who's and the whys. And as it kind of relates to podcasting or vlogging or whatever, there's really 3 kind of actors that involves when you talk about that. The first one is me, right, or Jake, and that's the person that's sitting in front of the video or in front of the camera. And it's not very difficult to talk about the why for them. And the why is that, hey, I've got something to say and I want people to hear it. However, when you think about it that way, a lot of people that create vlogs or that create their podcasts, they really don't go past that. They don't go past that in understanding that there's really 2 other groups, especially if you talk about podcasting, that are involved. Vlogging and podcasting both have another group, which is number 2, which is the audience. And in the end, if it's only about what me and what I want and what I want to say and what I want people to listen to yourself, you have to answer the question of why would anybody else care, especially that audience, because in the end, the audience is giving you their attention and they're listening to you. So what is it that you're going to have to say that they would actually care about? And as you begin to build that audience, you kind of get into the third group, which is the one that I think that Jake was actually asking about, which might be the guests. And in that case, you're talking about a guest that you're bringing on, and the why there is, how can Jake help a guest who comes on his podcast? How can Jake help the guest that comes on to deliver their message? Because in the end, the guest a lot of times has a podcast or a vlog of their own. They've got something to say. They're coming on Jake's podcast to basically introduce themselves to Jake's audience. And Jake's bringing the guest onto his podcast to show Jake and his podcast to that guest's audience. So really it's somewhat of a symbiotic relationship. They've got to be connected. You've actually got to learn how to connect one group to the other and grow them. And in the end, you've got to attract both. One thing to remember when you're talking about the audience or guests, it's when you're starting out, which I don't know how long Jake's been doing this, but when you're starting out, really you have neither audience nor do you have guests, and neither do you have what about the other that interests the other, right? You don't have the audience that the guest might be looking for, and you can't get guests because you don't have an audience that they would be looking for. So realistically, when you talk about sort of next steps, I think he's already done the start talking. He's gotten started. From my perspective, I think he needs to keep talking. And in the keep talking realm, that's where you learn to largely love the digging part of the job. You actually enjoy being in front of the camera talking about things. And if you can actually find some enjoyment and joy out of being in front of the camera, it really doesn't matter so much that who's watching it. Because in the end, you're the gold miner and you're enjoying the dig. And when you find gold, that's a great thing. And then the third one is to definitely work through those who's and whys so that when you talk about, especially that audience and the guests, what each of them is bringing for you and what especially you're bringing for them. And good luck with that, guys. This is David, and I'll catch you next time.